Good. Okay, so welcome everyone. We're extremely glad you could be here, and we'll listen to the intro. Okay, again, welcome. I'm not sure the music came through that time, but hopefully you've heard it enough that you could sort of follow along. Um, Anyway, thank you for being part of this, taking time from your busy lives to consider the theme, gathering hope and courage for a just transition. Uh, we basically have taken our original theme and it will now be in February. But we felt that given the events of the past week, that it would be valuable for us to acknowledge just where we are and what we are feeling. So what I wanted to do is just set a couple of parameters because we definitely wanted the ability for us to start by sharing some of our feelings where we are. Um, I always find that in this type of session, which I call dialogue, um, it's most helpful to start with some overall principles. Now, Dean will, in a moment, share the basic ones, but one of the foremost ones is that there are always these first principles that when we're dealing with sensitive issues, it allows us to go back uh, as the primary touchstone. And we've shared it many times. It's the vision of the flourishing of life for all. In other words, when we're uncertain, should we do this or should we do that? And we're unsure, we go back to that first principle and say, well, which one of those is most likely to help with the flourishing of all? It can also be thought of as the directions that one will affirm life and help nudge life towards that goal, whereas other directions can either distort life or even worse, denigrate it. So though that's one of the overall touchstones that we can use. And of course, we have our enduring principles, and we'll be getting into that because they're quite formative in helping us as well guide our language, guide our actions, uh, guide who we are as community, because community is so essential in our church. Um, so uh, with that as very brief introduction, I simply don't want to take the time. That's a topic I can go on and on about. Most of you got the email where I basically outlined things. And I'll let Dean take it from here in terms of this first of three sections that will involve sharing. So Dean, over to you.
Thank you. So thank you all for attending today and also adapting to our change of plans for today's session. For the last 4.5 years, and I told somebody a while ago, 3.5 years, I look back, it's been 4.5 years. We've been presenting monthly webinars, bringing our climate crisis into focus for our church community particularly. And we've echoed scientists who tell us our global climate emergency is fundamentally a spiritual and a moral challenge because the facts of the situation have been known and explained to global leaders for more than 4 decades. It's not what's factually true that's in question. It's what will motivate the human will and the spirit to action. And as you know, our North American climate justice team has worked with the Greater Pacific Northwest Mission Center to bring forward a resolution calling for divestment in fossil fuels and a just transition toward clean sources of energy. And that resolution is on the agenda for this year's Community of Christ World Conference for consideration. And we had been preparing our presentations leading up to the June conference to provide information in support of that resolution, a just transition toward a clean energy future on behalf of all. But we now have a president and other leadership in the United States who deny the reality of a human-caused climate emergency and oppose any limits on fossil fuel production. In fact, the Secretary of Interior designee says his mission is to increase fossil fuel production in service to national security. So our team has been experiencing a crisis of our own. Not a crisis of confidence, but perhaps an uncertainty as to our most effective course of action, both within the church and our respective communities. We've been lamenting and searching for paths toward renewed hope. And we therefore felt it would be important to share that with all of you, and especially to listen to what is in your hearts and on your minds. We seek to redirect despair to hope, to encourage and embolden, and to invite you to share where you find yourselves in these current challenging times. We are not seeking or encouraging political statements, but your reflections in keeping with our enduring principles of the sacredness of creation, the worth of all persons, and our team's guiding value, the flourishing of life for all. So I would invite you now, first in just a word or phrase, to share what is weighing on your heart. And again, because there are many of us, just a word or a phrase initially. And if you feel more comfortable putting it into the chat, then do so there. But we are anxious to hear what you, as our devoted followers of this process, have been thinking and feeling in your hearts. Rosalind says frustration. Marilyn says, I'm feeling very sad and angry. overwhelmed. Where to start?
I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful because of the progress that's been made so far.
Diane says, my heart is heavy, especially in thinking of what kind of earth we'll have for our grandchildren. And Pam says, concern for the marginalized. My wife Susie, who's standing here, says she is very angry. Defiantly hopeful, worried for everyone's safety, frustration and feeling hopeless on this issue, determined to do my part, unbelief, finding what is mine to do, anticipating civil society to organize and make great progress. And Dennis says hope remains tied to action. I have faith in the Creator, but see much to work on. Time? Is there time? I assume that's what that question means. And Alice is trying to hang on to hope. There is a lot of frustration and anger being shared, but a greater hope for a much better plan for providing energy for those that need it. And Marilyn's offering a prayer for a change of heart. Also, there's gratefulness for those countries who are stepping up and making positive changes. And confusion that so many still don't feel climate change is real. Let me say that it's encouraging, at least for me, and I suspect for the other members of our team, to know that so many of you share the sense of challenge that we've been experiencing in questioning, what should be the right direction for us to take in these next few months, particularly leading up to a World Conference and the consideration of that resolution. Are there any others who haven't yet had an opportunity to express their feelings? Anyone who wants to?
It's beyond me that we still have so many deniers. I can't understand that. That's beyond my figuring out what's going on.
So many deniers, you said.
Yes,
Mhm.
deniers of the climate change.
Carrie, you said listening beyond my personal reactions. Can you explain what you mean?
Sure,
I think
thanks.
yes, go ahead.
I I can have a tendency to react, and I'm trying to listen to the various voices out there. Um, and I find that there is so many different opinions, and I'm not sure just where I stand in the midst of it all.
Mhm. I appreciate that. And Michael has shared a resolution from the UN in the last year, um, encouraging a whole government approach to the work around, I assume, the challenges of our climate emergency. Marilyn, thank you. Onward for your resolution. Are you coming to conference? And Kay is hopeful. Talking about adding solar panels this morning in our business meeting. I assume that means at your congregation. So even in the midst of any sense of despair, there are still actions being taken at our local community level to still continue to take those necessary next steps. So I want to invite you now to, having heard the expressions on the hearts of each of you, to just spend a minute praying together in silence, to gaze with tenderness on each of the faces who are on your screen this afternoon, and hold each other in that prayer that you might share in your own mind. So just take a minute. Joan, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Dean. And Rod, if you can make me a co-host, then I'll be able to share screen in a minute. Like so many others, I've been struggling recently with hopelessness, despair, and overwhelm when it comes to the climate crisis and climate action. So I got to the point where I had to choose whether to stay there or to find a way to refocus, to revision, and to re-engage in hope. There's no going forward without hope, and it's not something that can be faked. It needs to be real. Our overall theme this year is prophetic courage for a just transition. So I began by going back to look at notes from President Beasley's sermon at a GPNW worship service in October 2020, where he talked about what it takes to be a prophetic people. And if things work well, in a minute, you'll be able to see that. Can everyone see that now? Okay, good. I've got overlapping screens here somehow. Steve made 5 major points about being a prophetic people. The first is to accurately discern the realities even when we may not want to face them, kind of where we're at the moment. Then we envision an alternative future, something that we've already started talking about and we're going to be talking about through this series of envisioning the future that we hope to see. While we must seek the best future for humankind and creation, that future must include solutions that secure the well-being of the most vulnerable. So we talk a lot about the need for a just transition to sustainable energy. And in everything we do, we need to pray, plan, and act in hope. The order of those three words, pray, plan, hope, is, I believe, critical here. So I came up with a prescription for myself to revision and refocus an authentic, real hope. For me, there are three critical steps, which I want to talk about for just a couple of minutes. First is celebrating the positive changes and actions. That's part of accurately discerning true realities, Steve's step one. The second is to look at the tipping points or critical momentum points that are already in progress towards positive change. And the third is to adjust my expectation of my role, of where I fit into the big picture of climate action and of God's good future. So let's take a look at this prescription a little more deeply. The news is full of doom and gloom, of negativity. That's why Catherine Hayhoe always starts her newsletter with some good news, and only then follows with some not so good news. In her newsletter from January 20th, and if you haven't been following Catherine Hayhoe, it's an excellent newsletter to subscribe to from her website. She's had 2 newsletters this week alone. In January 20th, she explained why there's so much more negative news in the media and on our news sites that we're constantly exposed to. It's because people click on negative news more than on positive articles, which means that negative news sells, which means that our news sources will be overwhelmingly packed with the negative, with the positive often going unnoticed. So step one is to take steps to find and focus on those positives. And boy, once you start looking, there's a lot to celebrate here. Step two is looking at momentum, looking at the big picture, the forest, not the trees. This picture is a little blurry because it's a screenshot I took from a climate webinar Randy Litzenberger did back in January 2022. Both photos are of the same street in New York City, taken 13 years apart. In the 1990 photo on the left, almost all are horses and buggies. There's just one automobile circled in red in the picture. In the 1913 photo, those horses and buggies are virtually all gone, replaced with cars. There's one police horse off to the left side. A total social and technical transformation in 13 years. That's the thing with progress. Once it gets going, it can't be stopped. But the transition is never linear. As with this example of European car ownership between 1920 and 2005, it's almost always a slow start with a few bumps along the way, but then it reaches a tipping point where the momentum is enough to launch a radical transformation. And that's what we're seeing now with the transition to clean energy. Take this slide of the transition to EV light vehicles globally. A very slow start with very small increments of growth for multiple years, but gaining momentum around 2020. It may temporarily slow in the US and some other countries for a time, but it's already past the point of no return. And that's good news. Similarly, look at this slide of installed global solar energy capacity. Virtually flat from 2000 to 2010, then accelerating first slowly and then rapidly, especially in China. Last year, the capacity increased 44% from the year before. That's a huge acceleration. So this doesn't mean that we should all just retire from climate action, because there's more needing to be done, especially in the climate justice areas. It doesn't mean that there won't be tough times ahead or that there won't be increasing natural disasters. But it does give us hope, a lot of hope, to know that the momentum towards transformation is strong and accelerating. Which brings me to the last part of my prescription. I realized that I was trying to carry the weight of the whole world on my shoulders. I thought it was my job to save the world, that the road to net zero should be straight, even though nothing in nature happens in a straight line, and that when progress falters and falls in one area, it means that all of our efforts have been for nothing. I needed to readjust my expectations as well as my understanding of my role. My circle of influence is much smaller than the area of concern. And there's nothing I can do to affect change in that larger circle. And my circle of control is much smaller than my circle of influence. In fact, the climate scientists tell us that the most important actions globally are the ones that start with individuals and take place in communities, in our circles of influence, and in cities. So I need to keep reminding myself that my call is only to act in my circle of influence, and my call is best fulfilled in response to the promptings of the Spirit in my life. And so back to Steve's last point in his analysis of being a prophetic people, we pray first. Then, in response to the promptings of the Spirit and the opportunities or synchronicities that open before us, we plan and act. I want to close with this short saying taken from the Talmud, because I think it expresses really well the prescription, for me at least, of where to find, where to focus, where to fuel my hope. And I hope that each of us can move from our grief, from our overwhelm, from our despair at the setbacks before us, and refocus our hope in new and clear visions and actions. And with that, I'll stop sharing and turn it back over to you, Paul.
So this is an opportunity again to share what's on your heart, particularly in response to this question. How do you find courage in these challenging days? And what gives you hope? And again, feel free to share in chat or speaking.
Hearing about all that's going on.
Hearing that New York passed a law that the companies have to clean up the misses they make.
Knowing that I'm not in this alone and that all of you showed up here on a Sunday afternoon to share your your struggles and your hope and seek courage. If there's one thing that has come is this place of recognizing it is in our circles of intentional community and focusing our attention on right relationship, that there's more power in that than being co-opted by the despair and manipulation to be despaired, to be in despair.
I decided there was an action that I could take personally. When my father passed away, he worked for an oil company for all of his life, Standard Oil, and then BP. And so when he passed away, I inherited BP stock from him. At the end of December, I divested of that stock. The stock is gone. That was one thing that I could personally do.
Recent article kind of sharing that there is a kind of reawakening of the value and of geothermal energy with regard to simply putting pipes about 3 to 4 feet under the ground, and how energy it's a huge energy assist for heating and cooling. So it's not such a huge undertaking.
There are some contributions in the chat as well. To realize that you and many others share the same convictions, that I'm not alone. Sphere of influence was a helpful reminder, and thanks to Joan. There have been some huge wins, even in the US, including the passing of cleaner refrigerant gas laws that went into effect at the 1st of January. Connecting with and listening into courage and courageous people. Greta, Bishop Bodie, others, bolsters and guides my courage and renews my hope. You'll let another one of our voices read a couple of these.
Michael DeMall says, there's a concept called crisis and victory. An example, the horrors of World War II gave us the Declaration of Human Rights. The ozone hole gave us the Montreal Protocol. The hardships we endure provide incentives for change. And Elizabeth says, reading about what groups have done that are making a difference, combining the realities of taking care of the earth that actually help the economy, which is often the focus for people. And Marilyn says, I live very close to Oak Ridge, and that's in Tennessee, I assume, right? An enormous facility is being erected to offer that option for energy. And I think you're responding to the geothermal energy possibility that Nancy mentioned. Is that right?
I heard that there are oil companies that are taking their equipment and changing it into, make, creating clean energy. I think it's geothermal, but I'm not sure.
Sort of a swords into plowshares step, maybe, huh?
I read this week that the United States recently put out to bid a new area for oil drilling in Alaska and received 0 bids.
Encouraging.
The relative cost of clean energy sources like wind and electricity and geothermal is now really much better than fossil fuels, and both when you account for the need for mining and all of these kinds of things. And we just need to share that with people, that it's cheaper.
Lori Sharp reminds us that she finds hope in her personal relationship with nature around her, and gratitude for the ways we are present together, as for example today. Gratitude is becoming a lifeline for my spirit.
Whenever we drive out across I-70 in Kansas, I am overjoyed watching fields of wind turbines. There are problems we have not worked out yet because the native prairie chickens do not like them. So we have things to work with, but they're there. And Kansas is not going to go back either.
So I'll jump back in here again and just to recognize as we kind of move forward with what we're going to do today. One of the gifts of this present moment is I am no longer seduced into inaction by believing my government's going to do the work for me.
Oh, amen.
And I find that empowering. And I find it also a place of invitation to be working in faith communities because we bring special gifts. And the reason we bring special gifts is caught in this next slide. And this is a quote that has resonated for me for a long time, and I wanted to offer it to you today. For it may be the case that, as with the abolitionist movement in the 19th century and the civil rights movement in the 20th century, we will not respond at the scale and speed required until we see climate disruption as a moral issue and a spiritual challenge. So in addition to looking at those places where technology is moving forward and pulling us onward, to return to this place of asking what is our role as a prophetic people, where we should, in the best of worlds, be at this interface of recognizing moral crisis and spiritual challenge and bringing the spiritual challenge even to our prophetic voice. I also found this great quote this week. What if we were to approach the climate crisis with the moral clarity of children? With the moral clarity of children. This is in Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson's book about asking, what if we get it right? Visions of a climate future. She goes on to say, some things are simply right and some things are simply wrong. And I've been second guessing myself. I've been trying to find this place at the interface of kindness and compassion and open and listening, but also to stay firmly grounded in the truth of the voice I want to offer and that we want to offer. So I'm just going to offer this as we get ready to turn this over to Paul. She goes on to say, these are the things that she knows are right. And these are the things that I just want to offer. It is right to steward life and justice on this magnificent planet. It is right to quickly transition to renewable energy. It is right to protect and restore habitats and species. It is right to hold corporations accountable. It is right to ensure a just transition, leaving no one behind. So if you have some responses yourself to this question of what we bring as faith communities to this place where moral crisis and spiritual challenge meet each other, and this is spiritually challenging. I refuse to be co-opted into despair. We ask this next question, and because it's time to go to you, Paul. The next question that we have in front of us is going to be, What is the role of our faith community? Our faith community, ours and all our faith community in meeting the climate crisis. And so, Paul.
Well, today it's commonly accepted that use of tobacco products are detrimental to your health. And I suspect that we would have to really search to find a lot of people today, anyway, that would try to convince us that smoking is good for you, or even that smoking is not harmful. But most of us now realize that the tobacco industry spent millions upon millions of dollars lobbying, advertising, and suppressing the truth about the health risks of tobacco. Maybe we didn't realize it at the time. But there are reports in the late 40s and 50s linking smoking to lung cancer and other illnesses. And yet we still are projecting that it's okay. The US Surgeon General issued a report in 1964 concluding cigarette smoking was causing a lung cancer epidemic, and the warning labels became mandatory on cigarette packs. 1964. Yet, since then, we've seen the tobacco industry target getting children hooked based on their evidence that the earlier you get them, the more loyal they will be to your brand. And I remember ashtrays on airplanes. Then, a little bit later on, I remember the smoking section was the back 3/4 of the airplane, and then the back half, and then the last couple of rows. And it wasn't until the year 2000, over 50 years after the alarm was raised, that smoking was finally banned on all airline flights. Now, I think most of us would admit that the tobacco industry, this was an industry that knew about the health hazards of using their products. Their own research told them so. And they did not share that health hazard information. They kind of buried it. And they launched a lobbying, disinformation, and marketing and advertising campaign that to this day serves to protect profits over people. They coordinated a lobbying effort to shower gifts and donations to state, federal lawmakers to ensure that no laws were passed that might hinder their business model, that might interfere with their profit. They coordinated a denial program to claim that the medical evidence is not conclusive, claiming there's not enough evidence to support the idea of widespread health risks, even though 98% of publishing scientific and medical experts agreed. The industry continued to falsely claim there was no consensus, that more research was needed. And they coordinated and implemented a program to enhance a lifestyle image, to promote smoking, make it look cool, make it look fun. They kind of spread a general inevitability feeling that even if you don't smoke, others do and will, and that simply can't be changed. They targeted specific demographics, making it a liberating act. And even if you don't smoke, other people will, and that can't be changed. And all this intentionally and specifically in order to protect and maintain their profitable business model. Profits that benefited a limited, small percentage of investors and stakeholders at the expense of the rest of us, knowing it was killing people. So make no mistake, only the people getting rich from the tobacco industry continued to promote and protect the rights of smokers. Now, we've shared webinar after webinar about carbon in our atmosphere, the greenhouse effect. And concern over the warming of the planet began surfacing about the same time, back in the 50s. And documents have been uncovered that tell us that scientists from the oil industry warned their companies of global warming due to excess carbon in the atmosphere. And their temperature increase predictions were remarkably accurate. But let's ignore for the moment the calamity around the overheating of the planet. And consider with me that unlike the hazards of smoking, today, many of us really aren't that aware that burning fossil fuels are extremely detrimental to our health. And I worry that too many of us disregard the fact that burning stuff to power our world is killing us. Either that or we simply resign ourselves into believing there is no other option. We just have to breathe poisonous air. Now, burning fossil fuels pollute the air, spewing sulfur oxides, nitrogen oxides, carbon dioxide, and junk, soot, what the educated call fine particulate matter. And there are countless reports that confirm being around and breathing in these chemicals and or the particulate matter causes asthma, pulmonary disease, respiratory infections. Studies indicate that fine particulate matter causes or increases risk of heart attack, stroke, and cardiovascular disease. And even before we burn them, chemicals and compounds are released during the drilling, extraction, and refining oil. These are all carcinogens, and they contribute to or greatly increase the risk of cancer, leukemia. Breathing these chemicals impact child development and the unborn of pregnant women. A study from Harvard University attributes 8 million deaths to fossil fuel pollution annually. The British Medical Journal puts the number around 5 million. Now, some people will poo-poo it all because they don't agree. But regardless of the measurement, what criteria they use, I think it's fair to state that extracting, transporting, refining, and burning oil causes an enormous amount of death and suffering. Burning fossil fuels contributes to the greatest preventable cause of immense human suffering and human death on Earth. And at the same time, we have to realize that this human-caused suffering and death is not impacting all people equally. There are examples everywhere if we look beyond our own bubbles. Examples of places we call sacrifice zones, areas where we intentionally allow unhealthy, unsafe living conditions, where we intentionally decide that the people that live there don't matter, or at least they don't matter as much as you or I. Coal-fired power plants or oil refineries in this country are almost exclusively sited in low-income and minority communities. There are examples all over, but probably the most well-known is Cancer Alley in Louisiana. It's an area that's congested with oil, chemical, and plastic manufacturing plants that spew a shocking amount of toxins onto the earth, into the air, and into the water. And Cancer Alley covers predominantly low-income minority neighborhoods. Another sacrifice zone you probably never heard of is the Niger Delta in Africa. An area so saturated with spilled oil from the miles of pipelines running through it that everything is contaminated. The water, the land, the air. Some claim it's the most polluted place on Earth. Between Shell and Exxon and a few others, it's estimated that there have been 7,000 oil spills since operations began in the late 50s, averaging 240,000 barrels of oil being dumped into the environment every year. Fracking has raised the U.S. production of oil to world-dominating heights. Yet the health hazards of living near fracking sites never seems to show up in our media feeds. The Yale School of Medicine published findings that reveal the chemicals from fracking poison the air, the groundwater, and it results in low birth rates, preterm births, congenital anomalies, asthma, and cancers in the residents living nearby. And I would suggest that we must come to the realization that the fossil fuel industry, this is an industry that knows the health hazards of using their products. Their own research told them that. And they did not share that health hazard information. They kind of buried it instead. And they launched a lobbying, disinformation, and marketing and advertising campaign to this day serves to protect profits over people. They coordinate a lobbying effort to shower gifts and donations to state and federal lawmakers to ensure that no laws are passed that might hinder their business model. They coordinate a denial program to claim the medical evidence is inconclusive, claiming there's not yet enough evidence to support widespread health risks, even though 97 to 98% of the published scientific and medical experts agree. But they continue to falsely claim there is no consensus that more research is needed. They coordinate and implement a program to convince us that global warming isn't a thing. Convince us there's no other option. Life as we know it can only continue if we burn things to generate power. Convince us energy from hydro, geothermal, solar, wind. They convince us that's too expensive, that it's unreliable, it's undependable, and it's incapable of powering our planet. They convince us if we don't keep burning their oil that they have a monopoly on, that we're going to raise gas prices, or we're going to hurt poor people, or we won't grow enough food, and the sky will fall. And all this intentionally and specifically in order to protect and maintain their profitable business model, their monopoly on energy, maintain profits that benefit a limited, small percentage of investors and stakeholders at the expense of the rest of us, at the expense of the rest of the world, knowing they're killing people. And make no mistake, the people that are yelling to drill, baby, drill, that are hindering investment in renewable energy, and that are promoting oil interests, the only reason is they have a vested financial interest. They are getting rich from the fossil fuel industry, very much putting their profits over people. So why bring this up? Is this a moral issue and a spiritual challenge? Smoking today isn't as socially acceptable thanks to a handful of fighters for whom it was a moral issue and a spiritual challenge to save lives. It's thanks to them that my grandson does not have to breathe in secondhand smoke on an airplane or on a bus or at school or at a shopping center. Stopping the expansion of fossil fuels will save lives, improve health, and reduce suffering. Reducing the use of fossil fuels will save lives, improve health, and reduce suffering. And transitioning to renewable energy will save lives, improve health, and reduce suffering. Are those suffering health effects that are dying, are they not our neighbors? Lord, when did we see you choking on noxious air, or living on toxic soil, or drinking poisonous water, or residing in a sacrifice zone and did not take care of you? What will the response be? Should we as a church work towards and advocate for stopping the growth of fossil fuel use? work towards and advocate to reduce fossil fuel use quickly, and work towards and advocate to transition to renewable sources of energy. This is a moral issue and a spiritual challenge. It is for me. Thank you. Lori, take it from there.
I was just making a little space to honor and make sure that I'm taking in what you just offered. So yes, a moral challenge and a spiritual challenge. Some things are simply right and some things are simply wrong. How do I know the difference? What are the gifts Community of Christ brings to this equation? To me personally, for strength and courage, to us as a community, to the world. How do we make sure that our prophetic voice is speaking from God's Spirit and not from that ego place? How do we bring, as we stand here at the crossroads, our full hearts to this task? How does our spiritual work engage with this work of truth? And so I return us to what we've done before as a contemplative pause, just to reset, even though you've seen this set of slides before, to reset for us together. These are portentous times. We've been saying this since 1972. The land is being desecrated. That means it's being made unsacred by the thoughtless waste of vital resources, and we're still struggling to be at the forefront. In 2007, Steve also brought to the church these words, which I'll just let you read without my voice. The illusion of independence. So what's really true is the beauty and truth of an interdependent, fragile web of life. And this, which has become kind of a coordinating theme for this series. So which path not only will I choose, what path will we choose together? And how is it that we find shared values for being agents of healing, listening, as Joan reminded us, to pray as we find ways to take action? And so I just want to recall this, and that we were hoping to have some time for discussion, but I'm just going to do a little narration and invite you into the chat for ways in which you might recognize the power of shared values that are in our enduring principles, these things that we proclaim as moral guidelines that we share together. Now, I just want us to recognize as I do this little piece that our understanding of each of the enduring principles can be enriched when they're read through the lens of any one of the others. Each principle interacts with and enlivens each of the others. So recognizing that any single one of the enduring principles could be in the center of this picture. But since we're a climate team, I'm going to put sacredness of creation here. How is it that our enduring principles as a whole can uphold and be made more vibrant by each of the others? So how do the enduring principles of worth of all persons and sacredness of creation enliven and enhance each other? Does our understanding of the sacredness of creation broaden what we mean by all persons? Does the worth of all creatures that have been brought forth and carry the presence of God matter? How does our stewardship responsibility for God's creation focus us for right action? How do our responsible choices, made not with me at the center, but with the interdependent web of life at the center, allow us to protect and defend creation? How do we participate in the rhythms of grace and gratitude and generosity and reciprocity? These are the ways that creation itself has been created to be, full of rhythms of grace and gratitude and generosity and reciprocity. How do we teach and proclaim and act from this place for the flourishing of all? How do we humans meet this most challenging of the respecting diverse perspective? Excuse me. How do we humans meet the challenge of respecting diverse perspectives? We do live in a world that's very divided, and those division lines cannot hold. How do we meet this challenge of honoring various life experiences? And how does that relate to creation, which is a web woven out of radical kinship and right relationships and finding place relative to each other? How does the enduring principle of continuing revelation expand our vision of reality? And how does creation itself allow us to hear more keenly the revealed wisdom and presence of God in and through all things? How do the blessings of community encourage us? We cannot do this alone. How do the blessings of being in this community encourage us? How does the pursuit of peace, the calling and identity of Community of Christ to be pursuers of peace, embolden us, but embolden us in ways in which we carry our fierce hope with a deep compassion for all, even those who think and feel differently than we do? How does the call of God to all of us empower us for courage, for bold action, for hope that's not dependent on outcome, but that we undertake because there is no other choice for us as we meet this moral issue with spiritual hearts and the desire to be always led by God. So I offer this, and we'll let the discussion go because we're going to turn it to Rod to look at more closely at how it is we find unity and diversity across our differences, how we remain in congregations together where not all feel as we do, but remembering that in these principles and in these texts, we have been invited to this work so that all of life that holds the presence and power and wisdom of God might flourish.
Thanks, Lori. As I mentioned before, those enduring principles are a wonderful advance in our understanding of how to proceed. I'm going to spend just a minute or two on this notion of diversity, simply because this is a moment where diversity feels a little more like disagreement and And yes, many struggle with the worlds as they almost tend to feel like they're separating more and more rather than coming together in community, which is what we're all about. And I wanted to start with evolution itself. Let's get out of the human world and recognize that this world in which we came from, evolution, depended entirely on diversity. Just to keep it quick, I will just give one example, though it's there at every level from the minute organisms up to the largest, up to the whole ecosphere. The example I'll give is one that I've seen here in British Columbia, having to do with the simple aspect of clear cutting. That used to be a very common practice, still goes on too much. So they would clear cut these magnificent forests that had been so diverse because they were left on their own, clear cut, and then they would put up all of one species. Why? Because it's the simplest, it's the cleanest, it's the easiest, and it's the cheapest thing to do. The problem with that, I mean, the nice thing is they grew really well. The problem with that is that if any organism got into those forests that could attack the forest, everything would go. There was no diversity left to counteract that particular disease, and so the whole forest would be destroyed. And so we came to recognize that in evolution, the importance of diversity in any ecosystem was so important. You might not think it at the time. You'd say, isn't that a weed? Isn't that a problem? What's it doing there? And yet later on, it may be the thing that helps life survive until that particular disease runs its course. And that particular, what we thought of as a weed or a crummy looking tree, was the only thing that could withstand it. So diversity is written into the fabric of life. Let's take it then to ourselves. We too have this tension between the desire for sameness and the need for diversity. There simply are times when I have, personally speaking, I have felt, well, surely this is the right way to go, and yet recognized, I've spent a lot of time protesting and such, and one of the things you tend to protest against is business or whatever. And it's very easy to slip into seeing business as the enemy, the big especially the huge corporations. And I'd say I haven't gotten over that one yet. But one person once came to me and said, well, there is this thing called social entrepreneurship. And that got me thinking, my gosh, yes, that's right. It's still that business instinct. It's just slightly transformed. So there are a number of ways in which, if one is open, one can hear in opposing sides a grain of truth, sort of like that disease-resistant species that helps us survive, that we need, that we thought, oh, what's its point? So I basically have this aphorism or whatever you want to call it, the clearer our perceptions of reality, the better our chances of success. And that first part, the clearer our perceptions of reality, means I can't stay in a monologue. I can't stay in those who make me feel comfortable. I absolutely need that. There's nothing wrong with that. There's a place for friends where you can let your hair down, where you can say, I just don't understand this other side or these other sides or whatever. But it can't stay there. Because somewhere in that aspect in which I simply cannot understand, there could be a grain of truth that might in the future help. So that's one of the strengths of diversity and evolution, and it can be one of the strengths in our relationships. And so I've actually gotten to the point where, again, when I'm with friends, yeah, I want to be able to just be comfortable and talk about the way I see things, and we all see things similarly, and that's great. I call that monologue now, and it has its place. But if I stay in that, especially in a world, and I'll bring in social media and all the influences that, again, rather than bring us together, keep us in silos, keep us away from each other, and in fact, farther and farther away because of the algorithms and all that. You know all of these things. They're in the news all the time. That we've got to struggle against those perceptions. And empathy is one of those key things, trying to understand where that person came from. Where did that come from? And I have found, well, it was an inherited thing. They simply grew up with it. They didn't know any different, and they're simply perpetuating it. They're in a silo. It just happens to be a different one than I'm in. We both need to get out of this and share together so that where did I start when I started this thing? We can go back to those first principles, the flourishing of life for all, the affirming of life and such. And we can sort out which of mine and which of yours are going to get us in the same direction, where rather than us being opposed, we are now looking in the same direction. What's going to help life flourish? Well, I can bring this, you can bring that, and together we're better. That, in essence, is diversity, and it's what I actually go out looking for now, so that I don't stay or stifle my own ability to understand. And fortunately, we also have this notion of faithful disagreement, where we haven't gotten to that point yet. We haven't sorted it out. We haven't figured it out. But even in faithful disagreement, we can stay together and say, well, maybe you're simply processing things differently than I am. Maybe you always will. Is that a possibility? I think so. But often it's just the misperceptions that take time to clarify. So diversity, especially as we move forward in these next few years, is going to be critical. The final point I want to give is it doesn't, it doesn't leave us anchorless. We don't end up saying, well, I guess just anything goes. No, there was a first principle. What's the flourishing of life? Stay true to it for yourself. Be open to expand it where you see the insight is there, but stay anchored in that always be willing to share that. And hopefully the day will come when things will start coming back together. I have to leave it at that. We're running low on time. So, but that's just one of the enduring principles that we need to take seriously in these coming times. So I'll move us on then to our final part. And just give me a second while I bring up the slide. Okay. It's a problem when you got 3 screens. You got to make sure you get the right one. That's the one. So we will be entering our final section of gathering hope and courage for, sorry, okay. The third section, meeting this moment with courage and hope and bold action. And I want to start with a quote. It's a magnificent thing to be alive in a moment that matters so much. You may not be feeling it's a magnificent thing, but hopefully you've caught a little bit about this sense of diversity and the value that can be in it, but remaining anchored to your best sense of what is life flourishing, but remaining in dialogue with others. There are times when you simply can't, and you have to simply leave it in faithful disagreement. But remember to always come back. People can change. So with that, let's move on. And I will turn it over to Andrew.
Thanks, Rod. So I live in the British Isles, and the British Isles contributes less than 1% to global emissions. So over here, there are about 73 million people in the collected countries of England, Scotland, Wales, Ireland, Northern Ireland, and all the small islands that make up the British Isles. So my emissions are really tiny. So what impact do I have over world emissions? Well, obviously very, very little. Yet, in line with the advice from the IPCC to halve our carbon footprints by 2030, Helen and I have reduced our emissions by half. We've changed both cars to EVs. We've changed our heating, our hot water, and our cooking to electric. We've added batteries to our 15-year-old solar panels. We've also changed our diet and now pescatarian, so vegetarian plus fish, and reduced our consumption and reduced the buying of plastic items. We recognise that we are not having a big impact on global emissions. It's just like throwing a pebble in the ocean. But even pebbles cause ripples. And in doing what we can, as soon as we can, we are leading by example and starting to influence our friends, our family, and our church. My father-in-law, Dennis Aldridge, once said to me that I should never underestimate the impact I might have on others. and it is really starting to work. People are starting to take notice, starting to change their lives too. I know of church members and friends and family that have now changed a car or two to EV, fitted solar on their roofs and added battery, and are now considering electric heating and hot water. I have found that the best way to counter climate anxiety and climate apathy is with action. And despite what our world leaders might say and do, we can still act and can be doing what we can as soon as we can. We have a few minutes now to share your stories of how you're acting, how you are causing ripples to reach out, how you are influencing others to act. If you haven't yet started out to reduce your emissions, then perhaps now is a good time to tell me. I need to hear your good news stories. So type your comments in the chat or unmute yourself and speak. Who will be first?
I can share something really quick to get our conversation going. Our poem, Bridge of Hope, was used a week or two ago at an Interfaith Earth Care Coalition meeting here in Bend, Oregon that I've got involved with. And we did Lectio Divina with it, and has now is rippling out in the Unity Church, the Unitarian Church, the Presbyterian, the Methodist, First Nations person. A ripple effect of our work together and our poem bringing hope and willingness to act together to build a bridge to the future. So I'll just share that, and I'm interested to hear what else is out there.
I have a question. Do you have lots of charging stations in the British Isles to accommodate the e-cars?
We don't have enough, certainly, but most people charge at home, and that seems to work much better. It's a lot cheaper to charge at home as well. So, yeah.
I just put a link to a document put out by World Wildlife Fund in the country of Wales in the United Kingdom, their external global footprint, how the things they purchase from overseas are creating a footprint over there, and that there might be principles in that are similar for other countries.
Great, thank you, Michael.
Yeah.
Our environmental justice team at the Apple Valley congregation in Apple Valley, Minnesota. We are quite active. We've joined with the Minnesota Interfaith Power and Light. We have representatives, 3 of them, meeting with them every week and bringing reports back. And we have done the energy audit on a full energy audit on our building. We all the things that they were saying to do. We are getting some. We had a business meeting today. One, because so many of us are getting a little bit older, we're having trouble with the heavy doors, and we're getting electric doors finally. But we are making the changes, and we've been talking about an area on our roof that we have a roof that needs redone. And when we do that, it's probably going to be a reality that we will put the solar panels on that. So we are taking action. We save all of our scraps from potluck and things like that. They give them to me. I bring them home. I've been composting since 1998 when I became a master gardener. And you don't really have to go out and buy good dirt if you're making your own. Your own's better. So just throwing that in.
Thanks, Kay. That sounds wonderful.
There's some more chats here that are really great, wonderful. Rosalind says, in our home, we're increasing the number of vegan meals we prepare. I have planned a vegan tasting for one of our upcoming congregational meals. And I've walked to work for decades. Paul has replaced his Citi American Airlines credit card, replaced his Bank of America Visa card, which he only kept for use at Costco. And my wife got rid of her Barclays American Airlines card. Won't knowingly do business with banks that invest so much to expand fossil fuels. If anybody else from the team wants to jump in here for a different voice, Dina, you put one in. Do you want to read your own?
Sure. I just said that at a local meeting some years ago where elected officials were laying out their priorities. I asked what priority they were giving to the climate emergency, and others have asked such questions as well in the interim. And now there's a team in local government assigned specifically to develop climate goals for the city and the county.
Bruce represents a solar battery electric car manufacturer, and you can see some details there. And Lori shares, I love the earth and share my love with others. I note that loving the earth helps me contribute to caring for it. So recognizing our time, although I would love to hear more stories. What do you think, Andrew?
I think we need to move on.
So I think we'll move to the second clip there, Rod. Just given that we've only got a minute or two left. We wanted to bring our dear Susan's friend into this voice into this conversation. And so we just found, I went back and was looking for her when she shared her dream of all of these green dots, these little centers of possibility expanding and expanding. Maybe we'll find a time to show that in an upcoming webinar again. But in the meantime, I really recommend going back to that September, what was it, 2022, I think, Sacred Spaces Campgrounds video in which Susan shared such a beautiful moment. But so we're not going to watch that part again, but what we are going to do is share the blessing that she brought. She imagined the future she wanted, this dream that came to her, and she shared with us discernment steps about how to get there from here, not leaving the visioning at what she wanted to have happen, but how we might get there. And then her seventh step is where we're going to start and receive her blessing.
And positive.
So take this as a blessing. It's like this blessing she gave that day was tailor-made for today. So just receive this in the voice of our beloved sister. And I highly recommend this task of envisioning the future and then being blessed to believe we can get there. So let's see this and conclude.
Stay focused. Stay energetic and positive. Never give up. We will post this discernment process on our website, along with a list of practical suggestions that we've come up with, an expansion of the list that you saw in Joan's presentation. This vision of the greening of our sacred land can actually happen. We need to protect and restore ecosystems. We need change and transformation in every sector and every community. Our church resources and our tradition of restoration can become powerful tools for assisting the environment. Perhaps that is why we are the stewards of these vital lands. Perhaps we can make a small difference right there in our own backyard. If enough green dots appear, they will grow and merge, and the greening of God's earth will continue. God bless you in the effort. I leave you with the primary question. How can our sacred spaces become worldwide centers of cultural and ecological restoration? Doctrine and Covenant scripture, can you bring that up? 161 3c says, be courageous and visionary, believing in the power of just a few vibrant witnesses to transform the world. Be assured that love, going to add, and action will overcome the voices of fear, division, and deceit.
Blessings. And I think Rod's going to offer us a couple words about what's coming up. But
Yes, thanks.
you,
Yeah.
Susan, for your wisdom of that continues.
Yes, first of all, thanks everybody for coming and for sharing. So I won't even bother putting up the slide because I just overwrote it. Yeah, fun. But the point being, come next month, this was in your email, just the basic note that our next session is February 23rd, so it's about a month from today. And we will then do the session we were originally going to do called Just Transition Toward a Sustainable Energy Future. So this is getting back to our, well, and really, this is now part of it because these are the dynamics that will be occurring prior to World Conference. And I hope you've found some meaningful ways of helping again beyond that side of life and its fulfillment through today's session. But we will be continuing then starting February with our preparation for World Conference 2025, basically ensuring that this notion of just transition is understood rather than becoming a stumbling block. Mentioned it before, but it becomes a stumbling block when people turn it into a jobs or economy versus climate. It is not. It's both and. And so we're going to be taking a look next month specifically at these energy alternatives, the current winners, solar and wind with battery technology. But we'll also be looking at all the other ones. Somebody had mentioned geothermal. Absolutely, that's an option, a great option, where applicable. And the resurgence of nuclear energy, is that an option? Stay tuned. I'll leave it. Hey, good way to end. Leave it as a dangling question. So anyway, come on back next month. Thank you all for being part of this. And with this, I'll stop the recording and you can say your goodbyes. And again, thanks for coming, everyone. Great session. Appreciated everybody's sharing and perspectives.